in 2023, I read 45 books. That's the most books I have ever read. There's no way I'm going to read 45 books. Again, I'm just being realistic. There's no way I'm going to read 45 books. I read over 50 books this year. Hi, Jenni here, and it's that time of the year again. It's time for the 4th annual Jenskosmos Book Awards. I have been doing this since 2021 and it's time for another edition. So I will have different categories that I'm going to award some of the books I read this year. I read over 50 books this year. Like I said last year, I never thought I would read more than 45 books, so this feels quite odd to have read so many books. I'm kind of proud of myself for some reason. But yeah, so I have personally decided on these different categories, most fun read, the weirdest read, obviously the best book overall, best fiction, best non-fiction. I have brought in some new categories. I have brought back some categories that didn't happen last year, but I have brought them back. And yeah, let's just get into it. Of course, the first award is always congrats, Jenni read you this year. And this award is going to at least 56 books. That's an incredible amount. I'm still continuing on reading this year, obviously. Yeah, 56 books. I'm quite proud of it. So I want to start off with the best poetry book. I didn't read quite many, but I just wanted to honor this book because it really impacted me deeply. So the best poetry book is Edith Södergran, Maailma on minun, runoja ja valokuvia, edited by Agneta Rahikainen and Eira Sillanpää. So Edith Södergran was a notable Swedish-speaking Finnish poet. And her poetry just spoke deeply to me. I made a own post about her poetry on my bookstagram account, Jenskosmos, if you want to read more specifically, but they're all about existence and being a woman and not really identifying with some of the societal expectations. She suffered through illnesses, so she discusses that deeply as well. I think some of her poetry has been translated into English, so I highly recommend reading it. So yes, congratulations. So the most fun book award this year goes to The Stand-In by Lily Chu. I read this on Libby as an ebook, obviously. The story is about Gracie Reed, who has just been fired from her job. She had a very disgusting boss. She kind of suddenly gets into this whirlwind of being a double for a famous Chinese actress, Fang Li, because Fang Li was struggling with some mental health issues and feeling a lot of pressure and anxiety. So Gracie stepped in to pretend to be her. That's why I thought it was the most fun to read, because it was so interesting to see the differences in Gracie and Fang Li, Grace trying to be Fang Li, and it was very entertaining and really fun. Obviously, there's also Fang Li's co-star, Sam Yao, who's kind of not happy with this arrangement, but nevertheless goes along with it. I thought it was super entertaining, super fun to read. Obviously, it discusses the important topic of mental health and does it really well. I do think that it dragged on a little bit. Maybe 100 pages could have been cut, but other than that, I really enjoyed this reading experience. Alright, so my goal has been to read more books by Finnish authors. Last year I read 5, this year I read 12. Okay, granted, many of them were Moomin books, but still those are Finnish books as well. So the award for the best Finnish book goes to En voi sua unhoittaa pois by Anu Vähäaho. I read this in January and I still keep thinking about it a lot. It tells the story of Emerentia Brandt, who is a young woman in her 20s and she teaches at her local school. She's from a small town, but after her mother died and her father remarried, they moved to Oulu, where I live. And then she meets Lawrence von Rose. What really made me really love this book is how true it is to my own experience. I live in Oulu. This is based on 1820s Oulu. Emerentia is a teacher. I am a teacher. And the way the characters spoke in Oulu dialect was so heartwarming and almost made me cry, because I have never read a book and actually enjoyed it. And it included the way I speak. Like, it was such an incredible reading experience. I have her other book waiting to be read. I can't wait to read that. So yes, congratulations, Anu Vähä. I read a couple of classics this year. Some of them were Jane Austen rereads, but also some classics that were new to me. So this category is called The Best Classic That Was New to Me. A bit of a mouthful, but you know. And the award goes to Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. So this tells the story of David, who has left America and moved to Paris, and there he met Hella. He suggests getting married to her, but she travels on to Spain to think about it. And while Hella is away for months in Spain, David meets Giovanni. And then Hella comes back and things get difficult, as David has fallen in love with Giovanni and so on. And it is all based on in the 1950s. This book was absolutely incredible. You know, plot lines that include cheating usually do not interest me, but this was so much more than that. This talked about, you know, internalized homophobia, societal expectations, isolation, social isolation, what is considered proper and what is not. And I was just so deeply impacted by this book. It was an amazing read, and I have read James Baldwin before, but I want to read more from him. This was incredible. Congratulations. The saddest book award, so the book that made me sorrowful and upset me a lot but deeply impacted me. Saddest book award goes to Evening Primrose by Kopano Matluva. And I borrowed this from the library. It tells the story of Mase Chava, who has just graduated and has become a doctor. But being a doctor in her country, South Africa, has turned out to be a lot harder than she expected. She's very exhausted and she suffers from period pain and heavy floods, and I assume based on this description that she had endometriosis, but I'm not sure. This book is her writing a diary, and she addresses it to God and her kind of thoughts on her daily life as a doctor, daily life, you know, suffering with her pain. It discusses xenophobia in South Africa, women's health issues, reproductive health issues. And it was such a heavy, heart-wrenching, moving, harrowing book. Especially the third part, like, really destroyed me. It was so sad. The main character, Mase Chapa, wasn't perfect, but she was human. The book was so well written, and I'm just so glad to have read this book. It was incredible. So congratulations, Evening Primrose. Alright, so moving on to the weirdest book that I read this year. The book that kind of had me like, I'm not sure what happened, but okay. And that would be Spontaneous Acts by Yoko Tawada, translated by Susan Bernovsky. And what happened here? So Patrick, a literary researcher, is trying to get back into his normal life after the pandemic in Berlin, but can't really do it. He kind of struggles throughout. Suddenly he meets a new friend who seems to know everything about him, and then they get along. But this book has really interesting focalization, that we have a change in narrator. So while the character is talking about himself, he refers to himself as I, the first person pronoun, but also Patrick, and also the patient in third person. So it was a bit challenging to follow, but I really appreciated this kind of different focalization. I think the weird part for me for this book is just that I couldn't really keep up with this focalization quite a bit. It was a bit too abstract for me, especially the ending. I don't want to spoil it, but I literally I did not understand what happened. I can appreciate the focalization. Also, there was a lot of discussion of how words are created and what they mean and so on, which, you know, I do in my daily life. So while this was a weird reading and I'm not quite sure what's happened, I can appreciate and see that somebody else might enjoy it. I've actually given this book to Joel because he seems really interested in it. So congratulations, Spontaneous Acts, for being weird. So this is a completely new category, Best New Author. So the author I read for the first time this year, and that is Shauna Robinson. I read both of these books on Libby as ebooks, and I loved them so much that I bought my own copies of them. So she has written books about books. I first read The Secret Book Club. However, the version that I read, the US version, was titled The Banned Books of Maggie Banks. And in this one, Maggie Banks is a 20-year-old woman who's kind of lost in her life. She doesn't have a job. She's have been trying to find one for 10 months now. So when her friend, who is pregnant and like in the last moments of her pregnancy, she offers her to run her bookshop, she takes it. She doesn't really care for books, which I thought was such an interesting take on the books about books, because usually they are huge book lovers. And yeah, she changes things at the bookstore, and it's such a lovely read. I loved it so much. It was such a warm read. And then for Must Love Books, which I read right after the previous one. In the book we follow Nora, who is an editing assistant, and she doesn't really like her job, and she wants to move forward, she wants to get promoted, but she doesn't, and she's just kind of struggling with that and kind of like hating her job. When there are pay cuts instead of her getting her deserved promotion, she takes a secret editing job from another company. And then she meets with Andrew Santos, who is a potential author that they would like to recruit for her original publishing company. This is all about uncertainty in work life and how mental health challenges can impact you. I thought it was very lovely and relatable, and congratulations, Shauna Robinson. Thank you for writing these books. I have retired the category The Worst Book because I don't think any of these books were completely, totally horrible that I read this year, but I have renamed it the Most Disappointing Book. And for that, it is very, very sad when one of your favorite authors disappoints you, but the most disappointing book is Midnight at the Christmas Bookshop by Jenni Colgan. I love the first part of this Christmas bookshop, which tells the story of Carmen, who also struggles with not finding a good job or her own apartment, and then her sister helps her to get a job at a bookshop. Carmen was not very likable in the first book, but she kind of starts realizing her flaws and issues and starts to work on them, and really by the end of the book you can see her growth, and it was such a wonderful book, the first part. But then I read this one and I expected a wonderful story with the characters I got to know, and instead I found Carmen, who had not grown at all. All the lovely things that happened in the first book were kind of undone here. And I get that that happens in life. Growth is not just upwards, climbing towards a hill. It's more complicated than that. But I was just wondering, like, what was the point of the first book if the issues that were resolved in the first book are just continued here? It was very disappointing, and I really looked forward to reading this, you know, for my Christmas atmosphere and everything. But it wasn't that. It did not bring me Christmas joy like the first book. It did have a happy ending, which I was happy with, but the ending didn't really save me from the disappointing reading experience that I had. So that's unfortunate. Alright, we're getting into the main categories. So the best book, best fiction, and best non-fiction. I read so many good books this year, so this was very difficult to decide. I had my favorite book decided pretty much whole year, and then it changed at the end of the year. Let's start with the best non-fiction award. I read many great non-fiction books this year. I read Yanis Varoufakis, I read Munter Isaac. I was really happy with the non-fiction books that I read this year. And the best non-fiction book is Three Worlds, Memoirs of an Arab Jew by Avi Shlaim. Avi Shlaim is an Iraqi-born historian. He has Israeli and British citizenships, and yes, he has worked as a historian for a really long time. I had watched his interviews before reading this book, and I read it as an ebook, and this memoir recounts, one, his personal history, you know, first being born in Iraq, moving to Israel, then moving to study in the UK. So those are the three worlds. But it's also a history of the Iraqi Jewish community in Baghdad. And it's also his own research into basically how Zionists were part of driving out Iraqi Jews from Iraq. I really liked Avi Schleim's writing. Because I had watched his interviews beforehand, I could really feel his voice throughout the book. He was also very efficient with the way he shared all these historical details. And he also did very important research for the book, such as, revealing that some of the bombings of Jewish sites in Iraq were actually arranged by Zionists to further escalate immigration to Palestine. I also learned a lot of new information about Jewish community in Iraq and how they were literally just a common normal part of the society until anti-Semitism rose with the rise of the Zionist project. The book concluded at the 1967 war, and how he went from being a Zionist who served in the Israeli army to becoming an anti-Zionist. And he talked about how Israel is an apartheid state and only one democratic state is a possible solution at this point. I just really learned a lot while reading, which is always valuable for me. The writing was very easy to follow and very personal to Avi Schleim himself. And yeah, that's why it is the non-fiction book of the year for me. Okay, so last year I retired the Best Fiction Award because my best book was a fiction book, but I still thought that this year I would include Best Fiction because the book I'm going to show you had been my favorite book for almost the whole year. So I wanted to honor it some way. And that book is Welcome to the Hyunam Bookshop by Hwang Borom, translated by Shanna Tan. I actually made a whole video where I talked about how meaningful this book is to me, so I'll keep it short here. So the main character, Youngju, has started running her own independent bookshop after leaving her office job and divorcing her husband. She first hires a barista for the bookshop, Minjin, and the book focuses on the aspects of their daily lives at the bookshop, their friends and acquaintances, and why they have ended up where they are. While it's mostly focused on books, the underlying theme is, how capitalist society has disappointed all of these characters, the hard times they are having. I especially could relate to Minjin's character, who had graduated from university with top grades, but couldn't get a job after 2 years since graduation. So he ended up doing part-time jobs. So many of the characters felt angry, trapped, disappointed, and I felt like that was really relatable. And the writing is very straightforward and fitting for this narrative. It felt like a warm hug while I was, in a very uncertain situation with my own work life. So, Best Fiction, congratulations. Okay, so all of these books that I have mentioned before and many books that I did not mention have been so incredible. It has been a really good reading year for me. But the best book overall, the best book I read this year, one of my new favorites, is The Instrumentalist by Harriet Constable. I read this first on Libby, and I thank my lucky stars that I have the Libby app, because I have found so many incredible books there, but especially this one. This book impacted me deeply. I had to buy the physical copy of the book. I loved it so much. So, the novel is based on a real person, so it's a historical fiction based on real people. The book tells the story of Anna Maria della Pieta, one of the greatest violinists in Europe. At her time in the 1700s, she was taught by Vivaldi. So Anna Maria, in this fictionalized version of her story, is an orphan who grows up at an orphanage, which is a convent also, but a music school, Ospedale della Pieta. She is a remarkably talented violinist from youth. And then Vivaldi becomes the music teacher of the school and then recognizes and sees Anna Maria's great talent. And I love that this book focuses on her talent, her passion, her ambition. She wants to be the best of the best. This is ultimately like a story of a young girl who will do anything what it takes to become the maestro. Even decisions that hurt the people that mean the most to her. But when she is betrayed, how will she react? I love this I love this book so much. It's literally everything I want in that book. And very interesting main character. Interesting historical story that I had not heard of before. And it's about high time that Anna Maria de la Pieta gets the flowers that she has always deserved. I mean, at the time she was described as one of the greatest violinists in Europe, but she has been lost to history, and I'm so glad that Harriet Constable learned about her and then decided to write a book about her. Obviously, there are many creative liberties in this book, but at the end of the book, Harriet Constable shares what historical details were real, what historical details inspired some of the plot decisions in the book. While it is fictional, I did feel like I was reading real history, if that makes sense. Obviously, not everything is to be believed, but still it was such an incredible book. What I think really made it so special is that I love music so much. I love classical music as well, but I don't listen to it that often, but I have gone to symphonies. So that part of me as well and my interest was really highlighted while reading this book. A decision by the author that I really loved is that Anna Maria de la Pieta at her time was called a maestra, you know, the female version of the word maestro. But in the book, Anna Maria wanted to be a maestro, you know, the masculine version of the word, because she just wanted to be the best of the best, regardless of gender. I loved it so much. Congratulations, the instrumentalist and Harriet Constable, for the best book award at the Jenskosmos Book Awards 2024. Alright, let me know what were your favorite books this year. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for this year and staying with my channel. Again, follow my bookstagram account, Jenskosmos, there as well. Have a happy end of the year. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I see you in the next one. Bye!